My name is Chris Muenzer. I lead our innovation and development for Haselmeier, which is the drug delivery brand of medmix. Just real quick, we have the disclaimer from the lawyers here. We may show products that aren't approved, it's not medical advice, etc. So for those of you who don't know, as I said, Haselmeier is the global drug delivery brand of medmix. We've got a global presence in Europe, India, and the US, and we're really focused on being a preferred supplier for injection devices to pharma companies. And that's really the scope I want to talk about today is giving you a perspective of sustainability as a as a supplier of pharma, and what we are doing related in those topics and how we see the importance of that in our business today. So we'll talk a little bit about the sustainability targets that we have, I'll give you a little background on the types and sources of emissions, how we use tools to look at those in the development of our products, and then finally the role we see for pharma in really leading this part of the industry and making sure we're all moving toward a more sustainable future. So sustainability is something that we really take seriously at medmix. So the UN defined 17 sustainability goals. Medmix is an official signatory on that. So we have a corporate commitment to try and address this broad scope. So it's everything from poverty reduction, ocean protection, things like that. One area where I'm particularly proud within my own organization where we've made a lot of strides is on gender equality. So, being in a mechanically engineered-based field, it typically was very male-dominated. When I took over the group, we were completely, 100% men. In the few years, we now have half the leaders in the team are women, and we've got 34% of the engineers, which is not as high as I'd like, but is a much bigger progress from where we were before. And it's a very diverse group with quite a range of nationalities in multiple countries. But when we really talk sustainability, it all comes back to climate change. We can't address a lot of these topics, whether it's poverty, whether it's water, displacement of people, without dealing with the global warming effect of emissions, because all of these lead to pressures on these systems, which will really prevent us from making any improvement if we don't tackle the root causes. So when we talk about emissions, if you're not familiar or working in this space, you'll hear a lot of times Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. So these are how we classify the different sources of emissions. So Scope 1 is your sort of direct emissions from your company. So this is anything where you're burning a fossil fuel or doing a process that creates global warming gases, primarily CO2. So that can be if you have factories that run on natural gas heating, the emissions from maybe cars or vehicles that are used to deliver your goods from site to site. So those are considered your Scope 1 emissions for your company. Then we have Scope 2 emissions. So these are the first class of indirect emissions. So Scope 2 is anything that is generated from the electricity that you buy. So if you're depending on the country that your sites are operating in, that could be sources from coal, most likely natural gas, but anything that's generated from the electricity that powers your sites. And then finally, Scope 3 is the other sources of indirect emissions. So it's everything upstream from your supply chain. So if you have your employees fly on planes, those are Scope 3 emissions. If you buy things from companies that have a lot of emissions, that's your upstream Scope 3. And then your indirect Scope 3 downstream is all the things that happen to your product after they leave the door. Finally, there's also a category that some people refer to as Scope 4 emissions. So this is emissions where you've basically done something to defer the use of something that would generate fossil fuels. So the example in our industry, Roche was doing some work looking at if they had an on-body device that prevented a patient from having to go to a hospital. would that actually improve emissions through the avoidance of the miles that had to be driven back and forth and the fuel economy there. So within pharma, Scope 3 is our primary source within the industry. So we're not making concrete. We don't make steel. We don't have big plants that burn things. So it's really all those indirect effects. As you can see, it's 80 to 90% of major pharma's emissions come from Scope 3, and of that, the majority of that is the things that they buy. So. And that's where us as a drug delivery supplier, we are part of that Scope 3 emissions that the pharma companies have. So when you make a product, you're accumulating emissions across that entire life cycle of the product. So you start with the raw materials, taking them either out of the ground or wherever they come from. You have to process them. In our case with a device, you're molding, you're then assembling, packaging, and then eventually they leave your site and go to your customer, and then again continue through that value chain, you continue to incur emissions. In the industry, we like to talk about cradle to grave, which is basically all the way from the start till it's disposed of, versus cradle to gate, gate being when the product leaves our facility. And so cradle to gate is what we can impact directly. Cradle to grave is really something that all the companies that touch a product over its life cycle have to contribute toward. So the important thing of this is your Scope 3 emissions for your company include all of the Scope 1, 2, and 3 from everybody you buy from. And so it accumulates as products are brought to market. And we, in the pharma industry, it's a very networked value chain. No one's doing every step of the process themselves, so you have to really understand what's happening all the way down in your supply chain. So for our products, when we're designing drug delivery devices, one of the best tools we use is something called a lifecycle analysis, or a lifecycle assessment, sorry. So an LCA is how we understand all those pieces of the value chain and their impact. The reason there's an apple up on the screen, this is a good example my colleague Thomas Chur uses to explain, if you wanted to know what's the carbon impact of an apple, that seems like a simple question, right? It should be very standard. It's an apple. Apples taste the same whether we're in Europe or in the US, but it really depends actually on where that apple was grown, how was it shipped, was it cold stored somewhere, did I get it right off the farm, or did it come halfway around the world? And that's what we need to understand with the life cycle analysis. If you don't know all of those steps, you can't say what the CO2 is and what the CO2 impact is in that final product. And so when we're designing a drug delivery device, we map out all of these inputs into that product. So we have to look at where it's going to be manufactured, what kind of power is available in that location, what raw materials are we using, what information can the supplier of the materials provide us, where do we then sell it to the customer, and we build this analysis, and then we look at kind of a sensitivity. So if we were to change from material A to material B, how would that benefit? If we changed a set of features, does that increase or decrease the CO2 of the product? All those things get assessed. But what you end up finding is, in our industry, you usually always come back to the same trade-offs all the time. I like to think of this for those who work in project management. You talk about the project management triangle, the cost, quality, scope, or here we have the version for sustainability is you can optimize for sustainability, but a lot of times that will come at the expense of the usability of the device or maybe the cost of goods. We can optimize for cost of goods, but again, that can come at the expense of usability or sustainability. We always are trapped kind of in this trade-off. A good example of this is, a lot of the suppliers here today, if you go talk to them, they've got options for renewable feedstocks for their materials. So instead of using fossil fuels and natural gas, we would instead use renewable feedstocks from either waste, farm waste, biogas coming off of methane digesters, things like that. And that allows you to make a more sustainable version of the same material. The downside of this is added cost, it's greater pressure on land use, things like that. But we've at least made the decision within medmix that we believe this is the right trade-off to make for our products. So we've committed to use this type of material on all of our new projects going forward, which does help minimize the overall CO2 as much as we can with that trade-off. Another thing is even more important is the type of device you use for a given therapy. So very popular weight loss treatment that you hear about a lot in the news would have an auto-injector used once a week for, if you look at over 3 years, this would be the amount of auto-injectors, single-use devices that you would use and throw away. If you were instead to then package that in a disposable pen, again, based on an example of a very popular weight loss drug out there, you could reduce that by a factor of 4 because you can usually get about 4 doses in the pen, and that's usually limited by the stability of the drug. So you've now cut that down significantly. But you could also go with a single reusable pen. Now we've got one product that's used for the entire 3-year life cycle and has significantly reduced the amount of product we have to throw away. But to move forward here, this is where we really need the pharma leadership. For example, in that previous example of the reusable pen versus the disposable, that's got to be really something that the customer of ours, we can offer them the different solutions as a device manufacturer, but they've got to make those trade-off choices in their purchasing decisions. And so this is just one example of where we really need pharma to take the lead and help drive in the industry of where they want to go on sustainability. A couple key topics of examples of this. You see a lot of discussion with pharma on take-back programs. Was just in London a couple weeks ago for another conference, and we saw the really good example of the take-back program that the 4 major pharma companies with pens are doing in Denmark, where they're taking back about 30-40% of those products and doing at least a low level of recycling. The picture I've got here is an example from Switzerland, where I live. The Nespresso capsules, so these are the coffee capsules, have a program where you can fill the bag, put it in your post box, and when they deliver your mail, they will actually take it away, take it back, and can reprocess that. But the customers, or the patients are, have that contact point with the pharma company, and we need them to really drive that take-back behavior to bring these devices back. We can't, as a device supplier, we really don't have the ability to influence that. Another key area is, we tend to focus a lot in sustainability devices on this, hunk of plastic springs and things like that we manufacture in the device industry. It actually turns out that when you look at the life cycle of a drug delivery device, about 80% of the embedded carbon is in the drug itself, and then the rest of the 20% is in the plastics and the springs and the glass and everything. So if we can reduce wastage in the industry through maybe better adherence programs and things like that, then you actually can make a positive benefit on the climate impact of the drug without having to significantly redesign a product. So we've got an example here. We're involved in some adherence programs with our partner Ardex, right now focused on clinical studies and at least improving the adherence there. But again, digital solutions could have the potential as a sustainability improvement as well in that regard. Then the next thing is we need a bit more regulatory, either flexibility or regulatory courage in the industry around circular materials. Today, within the industry, pharma tends to go to the extreme measure on any regulatory issue. So right now, we're only using resins that are virgin resins that haven't been mechanically recycled or anything like that because of concerns on the regulatory impact. In reality, there's greater risk, I think, in biocompatibility and things like that on my iPhone than there is in a drug delivery device I use once a week or once a month. So I think there's no reason why we can't be pushing more to use these resins, but we need the help of pharma to convince regulatory health authorities that this is the right way to go. Finally, and most important, there's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of trade-offs we can make. They all come with cost, and it's very easy to spend money on things that don't really add value. And so I think the biggest thing that pharma could do to help drive this is to really set a cost of carbon or a carbon budget in their procurement process. That way, it really allows us to make the right trade-offs that hit the metrics that really can make a difference. We're seeing this a little bit in requests for quotes that we get from some of the larger companies, but a larger adoption of this practice would make a big difference in sustainability of the products. So thank you again for the time or listening. So that's the main things I want to cover. Again, the takeaways really hope you got from this is, for our industry, purchased goods, whether it's the APIs, the glass, and the drug delivery devices are really the main driver of the climate impact of the pharmaceutical industry. And right now, we can't solve that without dealing with trade-offs. So we need to look at where the right balance of that usability, sustainability, and cost is that fits for every player in the industry. And to solve this, we really need to push pharma to guide this. They're the end customer of these products. They control the access to the patients, and they need to set the lead on this. So thank you again for your time. If you want to speak more, the QR code goes to my LinkedIn. You can connect there. We're also here the rest of the day at booth C88, so kind of all the way in the other end, and happy to talk about sustainability in general, the products we have where we're trying to address this ourselves within Haselmeier, or just anything else about the industry. We've got a few minutes now. I'm happy to take questions from the audience, and again, thank you for your time.
Hi, Tim Holden of Mumford. It's all a bit about carrot and stick, isn't it? We're all going with the carrot, but do you think eventually we're going to need legislative stick to make a difference?
Yeah, I think right now we're kind of operating in an environment where I think the large companies are kind of doing a lot of this out of our own best interests. So, we've committed to our shareholders that we were going to hit certain sustainability targets. A lot of the large pharma companies have done that as well. I guess we're going to have to see how far that takes us. And then in the macro environment, you've got the energy incentives and things like that are going into the US, into Europe. I think getting into the policy is sort of beyond my remit, but it's something that may be needed if things don't progress to a certain point with just the companies doing it out of their own goodwill and shareholder commitments. So.
My point is that we don't like change because change costs money, time, resource, risk. So being enforced to make that change, it's the necessity of invention.
Yeah, may be required at some point. I think the market pressures will help drive there, and if patients ask for it, if the regulations ask for it, it will all start to move in that direction. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you again for the time. And I said booth C88 if you want to talk more. And hope you have a good rest of your time in Paris. Thank you.